Welcome to this edition, the June edition of Catalyst Wellness Alliance, AAPI Pastors Gathering. We are here on this edition to talk about how pastors and counselors can partner together for mental health. And today our special guest is Pastor Dave Lee with Harvest Community Church up in the Chicagoland area. He founded the church in 1995 and continues to serve predominantly second-generation Korean American population and diversifying as we speak. And he can update you on how things are going there as the church is growing and recently moved into a building and doing some build outs. And Christian counselor Irene Cho, who's also based in the Chicagoland area, licensed clinical professional counselor, and also the founder of Chicago area for Asian American therapists, and they will share about how they have come together to form something called PACT, P-A-C-T, which stands for Academics, Counselors Together, to form a community that's really helping the Chicago area churches on learning how to serve people well in mental wellness and health. Irene and Dave, thank you so much for joining us on this AAPI Pastors Gathering. So I'll hand you the mic and you can share about how PACT started, what you're doing, and how it's been helpful to the pastors and churches and counselors there in Chicagoland.
Thanks, PJ.
Well, yeah, thanks for having us. I thought maybe the best way to get started is if I invite Irene, who really was the catalyst for getting things going, to kind of share our origin story, and then I'll kind of share a few key insights on how and why our launch ended up taking root and being successful. So Irene, if you want to kind of get us started with that.
Sure. Thanks again, DJ, for having us. It's really a privilege to come and talk about what we started to do here in Chicago a number of years ago now. It feels like a long time. But I was thinking back on how we started and how this all began. And really, when I graduated from grad school in 1995, way back, there really weren't that many Asian clients coming in to see me to do therapy. But then over the course of my career, right around 2015, I started getting a lot more calls for people that wanted to come in that were identified as Asian American. And they were specifically seeking me out because I was one of the few Asian therapists in the Chicagoland area that people knew about. So I was having lots of people come to see me from really far away. And at the same time, they were struggling a little bit because a lot of times they were traveling far. Maybe they had waited a really long time to pursue therapy or treatment. So they were coming in with a lot of complex issues. And I was just, to be honest, pretty overwhelmed with the load. And so really PACT was kind of born out of this place of desperation, because a lot of my Asian clients were also identifying as Christian, were really involved in their churches and in their community of faith, but they were really feeling like it was hard to express or talk about their mental health struggles within the context of the church. And so the more that I worked with these amazing individuals and these people of faith, it became clear that though they were really involved at church and had a community there, that they just had to kind of hide aspects of themselves related to their struggles in this area. And I thought, oh man, it's such a shame, because in my experience in attending a Korean immigrant church most of my life, I found it extremely valuable to be in a community of faith and really being able to bring my struggles and my suffering to the church. But what I think what was happening is there's a lot of a variety of response from pastors related to mental health issues. And sometimes my clients were talking about the struggle that they had, and when they would try to bring up these issues, they would get a range of responses from helpful to really, really not helpful. And so I just thought, I'm really not feeling like the church can be a resource to these individuals that I'm serving. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could somehow bridge that gap, and start to create a way to talk about some of these issues within the church, because the church is where these individuals were going every week, sometimes spending many, many hours together with their small groups or with their fellowshipping with people at the church. But they felt very, at the same time, very isolated and alone. So that's when I reached out to Pastor Dave to see, because he was already a friend of mine. I knew he was pro mental health because he had sent some people to see me over the course of the years. And I thought, well, maybe he could be somebody that I could start having that conversation with. So that's when I approached Pastor Dave, and we just started talking together about what that partnership or that collaboration could look like.
Thanks, Irene. Around the same time, we were feeling like there were more and more people willing to express their struggles with mental health in the church. And I had received 8 courses in ancient languages in seminary and 1 course in counseling. But I was doing very little translation work in my day-to-day ministry, but I was doing a lot of counseling. And I felt out of my depth. In some cases, um, I felt that I was transcending what was appropriate for pastoral counseling and delving into things that had clinical depth, and yet I was not prepared for it. And so I began to refer out and realize that we need better boundary definitions and training on the pastoral side to know when that threshold has been reached, how to be helpful genuinely, how to guard against spiritualizing things that are clinical, but at the same time recognizing that there's a spiritual component to every part of human life that cannot just be pulled out conveniently. There's a spiritual component to cancer, and that's a medical illness, and yet there's clearly a spiritual component to the wellness process and the way that a person experiences and copes with that. So uh, it's a very tender thing there, and I realized that in order to have a fruitful dialogue, it couldn't just be a professional network. There had to be genuine trust, and maybe friendship feels like too high a goal in that like we're not going to be buddies. But what ended up happening in a lot of cases was a real friendship emerged out of those relationships. But at the very least, what started to happen was um, as we created a gathering place for these worlds to come together, mutual trust and respect was established. And we realized that we could now overcome the temptation to stereotype or even demonize the worst examples we'd encountered from the other side. There were times when I think counselors felt like pastors had over spiritualized things and we're not acknowledging that there was a clinical dimension of mental health, and we're just saying pray and read the Bible, change your attitude, and that should be enough. And on the flip side, I think some pastors had seen times where a person in their counseling room would just give a very one-sided view that was not rooted in reality, and felt like they were being encouraged to navel gaze or they were being medicated, and so mistrust was growing. And it was, of course, not based on actual experience; it was based on secondhand reporting and a growing mistrust of the other because we didn't actually have real relationships with people who were helping on the other side of that aisle. So yeah, Irene and I found that there was an analogy that was kind of helpful in that we're like if you take the medical analogy, the therapists are kind of like the specialists, and the pastors are like the GPs or the primary care physicians, and we're approaching care from very different sides. But if we don't communicate, we can't offer an actually unified span of care to the people in our community. So we felt like we needed to learn from each other. And so we began with a regular gathering cadence. And we settled on a quarterly in person gathering um, where we would meet around discussion topics and just hear from one another. Yeah, a couple key insights that we found that allowed us to be successful early were that there were already existing networks taking shape on both sides of that equation. Irene was forming a network of Asian American counselors in the Chicagoland area, and I had been part of a pastoral network in Chicago that I had led for about 12 years. And I had stepped down from leadership, but was still very well connected. So we realized that having access to existing networks and inviting them in because they trusted us, they were willing to trust the gathering place, and that helped a great deal. Um, and then also, really, just the spirit of friendship. They say we're not here just to flex in front of each other or to teach each other, but we're here to actually learn who these other people are and create a sense of humanity and personhood to that. And then from there, to open up mutual learning and understanding. And by focusing on the relationships first and not just on the exchange of ideas and principles, I think that has really set the foundation well for why PACT continues to be something that at least those who participate in it are naturally drawn to it month after month. It's not just to gain something professionally, but because we're growing to really enjoy and trust and like one another and benefit immensely from that. Yeah, maybe we could explore next what makes this kind of a gathering place valuable for the various participants, because it was important to us that it's not one-sided, where one group is teaching the other group, but that it's a place of mutual understanding and learning. And everyone who comes needs to draw some benefit from it. Um, I can maybe set it up and then share about what pastors have gained and invite Irene to share about some of the benefits to the counselor side. Definitely is a place of mutual learning. Uh, Pastors receive very, very little training in counseling. I don't know if we even receive very good definitions of what pastoral counseling is uh, against what clinical counseling is. And I think there's then a tendency to believe we have the answers for everything. And because mental health is a little fuzzier than physical health, none of us pretend we're like the same as medical doctors. And so we don't delve into that territory. But because mental health touches the realm of psychology and attitude and character and well-being, it feels softer, maybe fuzzier. And so there's a temptation to believe that we are actually well equipped to address everything that happens in that realm. And I think one of the things that has happened in our gathering together was an understanding and an admission of some of the limitations we have, both because of the scope of our calling as pastors, but also because of the dearth of training to acknowledge that if we're going to care well for our people, we can't be the final stop on that train circuit for them, that they may need the help of others beyond our ability to care for them. We began with more like a didactic approach where a counselor would come and give a seminar, and that was actually very helpful. A lot of good information was exchanged, but it left us kind of just in a more Q&A forum, and there wasn't as much mutual learning. And so we evolved to a case study approach where we kind of took turns. A therapist or a pastor would write up a case study that is reflective of a very typical engagement we would have. And then we would talk about how, if this person presented in the church at a pastor's office, how would a pastor approach or interpret what's happening? And then the counselors would offer, and we would do this in breakouts at the tables so that you were really only conversing with 5 or 6 others. And there was some really rich back and forth. There's a lot of mutual learning. And so I would say that's one of the things that pastors have really gained, is realizing how many different ways there are to look at and understand some of these things that are affecting our people. I also really benefited greatly from growing my referral network. As a pastor, I really care for and I'm protective over the people that I'm called to serve. And so I don't release them to just anybody. I have to really feel like I can vouch for the character, the heart, the spirituality of the person who is now going to offer them care in other areas. And as I engaged with this network, I got to meet a lot of really, really wonderful Christian counselors in the Asian American space. And so my referrals out became much more numerous, to the point where I think we were overloading a lot of our colleagues and ran into a supply side problem for sure. But that was one of the great benefits is I had so many more trusted counselor colleagues that I could refer out to with confidence. Um, and it also opened a lot of us pastors up to seeking and receiving therapy for ourselves so that experientially we're able to acknowledge the great benefits of seeking this help and recognizing that we needed it much more than we acknowledged before. Irina, I wonder if you could kind of take it from there and share some of the things that counselors have gained.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think like when we first started meeting together, one of the really fun things about getting together was as Dave said, it was just forming these relationships and starting to break down walls of mistrust. That I think is, as Pastor Dave mentioned, when you're hearing only one side of the story, it's really hard to know exactly like what is really happening. So one of the biggest benefits for me in going into a meeting like PACT is just getting to know the pastors, hearing their heart, um, getting to see what they're doing in their churches, and also learning and hearing about what types of mental health struggles that they were seeing within the church. Um, I see a variety of conditions, tons of different kinds of diagnoses, and I just didn't know like what are the pastors dealing with? What are they having to navigate on a day-to-day basis? And one, I just love being able to go and hear their stories and support them in the things that they're struggling with, and even just be able to provide a little bit of insight to fill in the gaps around what maybe they didn't get in terms of training, um, and to unload some of the burden that some of the pastors were experiencing. Every pastor that I knew was expected, to do pastoral counseling. So to be fair to you, Dave, like when you have the one class and yet you're part of your job, the expectation is to do counseling and to do it well. That's like a really bad setup. And so I felt like, one of the huge benefits to me is I get to go in and to be a support and to share some of my knowledge and to feel like, especially to a group of people that already were kind of sold on the idea that mental health was a really important part of spiritual formation, and really of value to their people to begin addressing. So even just to go into a group with a bunch of pastors that I knew really get it and like were pro counseling was just an amazing thing because that's not always the case. And there is a variety of mistrust and skepticism, or even just a little bit of fear. Because, like as Pastor Dave mentioned, psychology is still kind of like a soft science to a lot of people, and to be fair, sometimes it has done damage to people as well. And so, kind of walking into a group and realizing that my thoughts and the things that are important to me around my work would be valued and respected is like a huge aspect that I've benefited from as well. Um, I think just really realizing it kind of coming to PACT on a monthly basis really pushes me to think about the importance of spirituality and community in the church in general. I think when you hear like negative talks about clients will bring around the ways that they've been injured or hurt within the church, I think the natural reaction that I was having was to kind of feel like, okay, I maybe just not I need to not send people back into their churches. I need to protect them from some of the things that are happening in those environments, but really realizing like that cuts off a huge resource. And if I could like understand the things that were happening to my clients and help them to be empowered to go back into their faith communities, that was going to be a huge value to them. So it just like keeps that in the forefront of my mind more so, because of the work that we're doing, because I get to hear the hearts of the pastors. I trust them. I have a sense that they have what the best interest for my clients and they love their people. So for me, that's been invaluable and has been a shift in my work. And I guess the last thing is Pastor Dave recently has been encouraging me and the group and the Christian counselors there to kind of ask ourselves, or at least like reflect on like how our counseling is different as Christians. Is it simply that we're Christians and doing counseling, or like in what ways are we thinking about things differently, having this faith perspective? And I don't really, to be honest, know exactly where I land on that yet, but it's been something that's been challenging for me and something I'm gaining from being with pastors and trying to kind of nail that down in my mind so that I have a working framework and in which I'm executing my faith that's more than just, well, I'm a Christian and I see Christian people. So if that makes sense. And then I guess this really hasn't applied to me as much because I my practice has been like packed for a really long time. But I do think that there is the steady flow of uh, pastors referring to counselors within the network the other network that I created. And that's been really important to me to see that Asian clients are getting quality care from other Asian American professionals. And so seeing that nuanced cultural care being accessed more frequently has been a major benefit to me as well with the vision that I have for this other organization. So yeah,
Thanks, Sharon.
yeah.
Yeah, and I certainly think one of the counterbalances to hearing these negative reports of toxic or unhealthy church environments is for the Christian therapists to consider their own experience of being part of a faith community and realize there is another expression of the church that is healthier and maybe can be challenging the clients to consider, is your environment part of the problem? Um, but if that therapist does not have that experience in their own walk, then the church begins to be a threatening place, a place that we need to rescue people from. And so I think that this collaboration has produced a lot of growing trust on both sides of that. That has been really enriching. And when we started, no pun intended, I know Irene said her client load has been packed, but that's one of the byproducts is we realized that there is a growing supply side problem. I am now referring out to this trusted network, and my people are reporting back no one could take us on. They're already overloaded. And we realized that there's a third leg of this stool. When we began, PACT stood for pastors and counselors together, and we conveniently repurposed the A in the acronym to become academics, recognizing that they provide a very important part of the ecosystem in terms of data-driven research that helps us clearly understand what we're seeing, as well as they're on the production side of sending out new people trained for this work. And right now, most of our academics come from the therapy side, but we recognize that we need more people from the seminary side as well to help reshape what seminary education and pastoral preparation looks like, so that rather than correcting mistakes once they're in the field, to set them up well for what the expectations and boundaries are before they hit the field and are credentialed to be pastors. And so we want to engage more with the academy, and that's still a work in progress. Even the academic who's serving on our board, we're working through like what exactly are they bringing to the table and drawing from that engagement. And so that because that's a relatively new thing, we're recognizing maybe we need to collaborate, for example, in a more intentional recruitment of good candidates to seek clinical therapy as a career path, to just help increase the supply side. So that comes down to the way that we counsel or lead some of our young people in the church to say this is a wonderful way to make a big difference in the world. We also want to help give those in the academy a real-time finger on the pulse of what those practicing on the front lines are actually seeing in the real world, so that their research is not devoid of a real-world picture of the things that are affecting our communities. And at some point, we would love to see and support the rise of communities like ours in other cities. We're not looking to expand our organization, but simply to cheer on others who want to form something like this. And if they have practical questions, we can stand in the place of supporting and cheerleading that. And maybe someday move towards something like a national gathering in collaboration with other outfits like the CWA, just to say maybe what we need is a national level gathering place, a conference. But that's a far down the road thing at this point. we're still trying to really root and establish what this local expression looks like for us. I think the last question we can kind of address before we open to Q&A is, what does it take to start something like PACT in a different city? That's a question I've been, Irene, I know you face that question very often when you're traveling. Um, Maybe we could start by just saying ours is a story and not a model. I don't know that we found some formula to make it work. It just was a really happy gathering of two people who happen already to be friends and have a baseline of trust and come at the same rising need from different places. And we also both happen to be kind of at the tip of the spear of growing networks in our own fields that we brought together. So it was like one of those very fortunate coming together of lots of moving parts at the right moment, the right place, the right time. And so I don't know that we can offer a reproducible sequence of events, but we can really more point to what elements made it work. And we've shared some of those already. Um, Definitely a focus on relationships. Maybe, Irene, you want to kind of expand on that a little bit,
Sure.
maybe share a couple of other.
Yeah, I think, it's something that's sort of unique to the pastoral realm, at least in the Asian churches, is that I do think that there is like there's and in fact one of the members of our board, but prior to this, preparing for this a little bit, I just kind of reached out and asked, like, what are you guys' thoughts about what you're getting from coming to PACT? And he had said, he's a pastor, but also a counselor by trade. And he was just talking about how one of the reasons why he joined PACT was because another pastor friend who he's very close to invited him. And really, what I find unique about the Asian church is that the pastors, they know each other pretty well in the area, and um, they really kind of trust each other. And part of why they come is because they know somebody. They know somebody that is there, and they trust that person, and we're sort of like borrowing the trust of that individual when we invite somebody to the group. And it's the same for counselors, but I think like the community within the Asian American churches in particular, I've seen that happen. And so, from my perspective, without the relationships, it's really, really hard to uh, bring in people that are going to be committed, because a lot of the topics we are talking about are hard, and there's no one answer, and it does involve a lot of vulnerability. And so, to have people that you trust that you're bringing in the form of pre-existing relationships has been really foundational for the group's longevity so far and what is causing people to come.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you can do it just based on the topic alone. Does that make
Mm.
sense? Like maybe people are interested in mental health. Maybe they're interested in integrating that within the church, but that's not going to be enough, because it takes time and commitment and a certain amount of tenacity to kind of keep going when this topic is so big and can be kind of overwhelming at times around like
Right.
what practically is going to make a difference in the lives of our people. Because what I've learned in PACT is like we both really care about the people we're serving, and, trying to let go a little bit of our one way of thinking about it and trusting that there's other ways, like we're not just like a hammer and a nail all the time, but that there are other ways to really help people, is a huge part of it. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think people are not, professionals who are busy are not looking for another thing to belong to or be obligated to. There's got to be a genuine motive in their hearts to seek out this gathering of people. And so our goal was not to scale or to expand quickly. It's to gather people who already got it and wanted to lean in. And through that organic network of relationships, we grew it. So today, on any given quarter, we'll see between 15 to 20 people show up to a gathering, about 4 tables worth for breakouts. And what's been very important is we've offered a lunch meal afterwards And about 90% of the participants stay for that meal, and that's where a lot of the relationship gets built and the trust is developed. So I would not skimp on the meal part. Around the table, it's just universal. People open up their hearts to each other. And it's the part that I actually look most forward to because we get vulnerable and we really share some of the big stuff from our own lives and our ministries together. We've been careful not to let it become a marketplace where you're just coming to distribute business cards and then grow your brand, but it's really a place of trusted relationship. And I think it helped that Irene and I both represented. We were champions from our respective fields, bringing others in. I don't think you could just mix a bunch of professionals in a room and hope something takes. You really need a champion who is legitimately rallying the troops on both sides to vouch for this, to argue for its efficacy and its benefits, and to stake their trustworthiness in that network on the outcomes of this. And so I think because we're both willing to do that, others who trusted us joined with, and we formed a governing team, a board of people who are really working hard and have been all in with us on this. And that's been such a beautiful group of people. We on that board have become genuinely good friends and love one another. And that's been one of the great gifts for me. And I think the last thing we just say is give it time. It's not going to take right away. We're in year 4, maybe 5 now. We started in
Actually,
2017.
yeah, almost 6 years. Yeah.
Yeah, we zoomed through the pandemic, and I think we're beginning to see the fruits of our labor showing up more and more in year 5. So it does take time to grow a meaningful network. So DJ, over to you. If you want us to do some Q&A, we can do that. Or if people
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing about the story of PACT. It's been an inspiration to me as I connect with pastors and counselors across the nation. And it's our hope here at Catalyst Wellness Alliance to foster a national network and community through our monthly gatherings here virtually so that we can really address the issue of mental health and wellness for our entire Asian American community, because it is at a crisis level. It really is. And as you've mentioned, the supply does not meet the demand. And there's so much more that churches can do to complement what counselors are doing, and to have these places of building trust, shared experiences, and then knowledge, and might need to be in that order. So I really appreciate how you have started with a foundation of trust and relationship. And I was honored to be with your community this past February, to meet you in person and to meet the many people who were there. And we did a case study together. We had lunch together. And I know from talking with you several times that having a meal together is an essential part of that relationship building. So glad that you're continuing that work. We have a question from Joe Yoshihara to Irene. Does your pastor refer people to you? And does that put you in a difficult position of seeing people professionally while being in the same fellowship? Does the relationship you formed through PACT allow there to be more cross-church referrals?
Such a great question. I think I kind of dodged this one because I've been full since the pandemic. So I've let people know, like, hey, I'm not taking new people. But I do think it does become, a bit of an issue for both. I think it's different for each therapist what their line is, but and also it depends on how big their churches, because I think like in a mega church, it might be okay to see somebody within the same church, but within the Asian churches that are smaller, typically the rule of thumb is you don't really see somebody from your own church. So I refer out regularly to other colleagues that I know that don't go to the church. But it has been hard because there's like 2 degrees of separation with if you're Asian and you're Christian and you live in the Chicagoland area, it's like, oh, I know her brother's uncle, or I don't know. There's so many ways where it's like conflicts of interest. So it has become a bit tricky. But I would say for the most part, that's what we try to do. Just makes things easier both for the clinician and for the individual.
A question from Jay Lee. What does mental health include and exclude? if Dave, you would try to answer that, and Irene.
That's a huge question. I mean, obviously, there's the day-to-day experience of sadness, happiness, the normal ebb and flow of both cognitive and emotional function. And it's a sliding scale. So I think part of it is on the pastoral side, to help people understand what are part of the daily rhythms of life. Not every negative experience or emotion is something to seek clinical help for, but it's part of what discipleship involves is facing loss, sadness. But when it lingers, when it grows in a way that feels out of our control, when the normal disciplines and practices that help us regulate through life are not seeming to help, I think there's a distress that develops for people. So I think for me, it's been about carefully listening to the sense of um, disempowerment people experience, the sense of frustration that it's not like I'm just feeling these things and I've laid down, but I don't think the normal means of responding to life are helping me um, get to a place of wellness. And that's showing up as, on the very extreme side, too often in the Asian church, if we don't promote a help seeking culture, people wait till stage 4 cancer before they go, hey, maybe I should see a doctor. And at that point, we're in such crisis mode. I'm shocked. And I'm like, maybe, I don't know. Like, I wrestle with, are you beyond help at this stage? Because you came to it so late before you decided to reveal to someone else. So what we're trying to do is promote more a sense of like, let's be in conversation in small group with one another, with pastors, very early in our distress experience to say, I think there's something going on here that's more than the average life up and down. And to promote that sense of like, maybe I do need this extra care and not wait until I'm having like suicidal ideation or thoughts of divorce or abandonment of my family. And to say, is there some help for me? But to say, like, let's start when you're much earlier on. Like, I've been feeling really irritable with my whole family and I can't shake it. I think I'm not myself. Um, and you know, many of them will come to me as a pastor saying, is this a sin issue? Is this a character issue? Or is there something more going on? And that's where I think my time with therapists have helped me really to develop a keener ear to like hear how they're presenting it and to ask certain kinds of questions to elicit, like, do I need to send you to someone else because this feels beyond the normal? It's an art more than science. I mean, as far as my experience and practice of it, I don't always get it right. I'll be very honest. Irene, do you want to take a stab
I
at
was just going to add to that. It's beautiful, Dave. Like this, for me, I work from more of like an attachment based perspective. And what I'm looking for in terms of a mentally healthy individual is that they have a good connection to themselves and a good connection to others, and that
Mm,
that's in harmony, that there's a sense of peace and calm like within around that, and that can involve looking at many different aspects of an individual's life and journey and what inhibits them from feeling like a true sense that they have that connection to themselves and to other people in a way that's life-giving and fulfilling and they feel like they're flourishing. um, so that's how I would define it.
mhm,
Thank you for answering. And one thing about mental health, as well as spiritual formation, is such a individual and personalized approach that you have to know a person's history, family background to really provide the right guidance for the next steps towards health.
Right.
And I know in the mental health world, for example, in depression, when you're still feeling sad after 2 weeks, there's a 9-question diagnostic that just helps to guide. Okay, these are some clear markers that some extra attention needs to be paid to. And there's
Right.
yeah.
assessments for the other kinds of diagnoses as well. Questions are rolling in, so let's see how many we can get to. Dave, is there an approach that a mental health therapist might take that would be a red flag for you, such that you would not feel comfortable making a referral?
Yeah, I had one case where actually I sent a couple needing marital therapy. And they were pretty much in crisis when we referred them out. But I could tell as the one of the spouses was continuing to meet with me just to kind of share updates on how effective that counseling had been. And what they shared with me was a growing feeling that the therapist was being triggered and over identifying with one of the partners in that crisis because it directly mirrored the therapist's own experience in marriage. And as a result, some of the advice that was coming out did not feel characteristic of this person professionally as I'd known them. Felt a little like it was cited and it was unobjective. And I grew alarmed because this was very different than my previous experience with this therapist. So I did seek the couple's permission to have a chat with the therapist and ask them just to discuss that case. And they were both very willing to let us talk to one another. And to the credit of the therapist, she was very ready to talk with me. And we had a very emotional hour-long conversation at the end of which I think she was able to see that something had been triggered in her because a therapist, just like a pastor, is a human being. We carry into it all of our own vulnerabilities and experiences. And this was so mirroring of experience. It was like she started to really dislike the guy and could not see past him as a threat. And so it was just in the end, they actually made the decision to disengage because it was not easy for the therapist to move past that. And the couple had lost some amount of trust, or maybe one of them had. The other felt really good about this therapist because they had an ally. So that was a mutual agreement. And I think the therapist was genuinely helped by our engagement. But I also felt like I wouldn't have known that this was uncharacteristic had I not had a relationship with that therapist to be able to say, I think there might be something going on here.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
Question from Lawrence. What are some practical things you do in your churches to prevent people from getting to stage 4, let's say?
Mhm.
Like a stage 4, like, oh, they're coming in way too late. Um, to be honest, like what to this work that we're doing with the pastors, I think they're starting to refer a lot quicker. Like when we first started working together, Dave and I in this group, um, pastors were waiting a really long time before they would kind of pass the baton. I think for a very good reason. Like even in the early stages of our work together, we had to talk about this concept of like spiritual authority and like that they're shepherds of their people, and this passing the torch felt very like abandoning or like a sense that they weren't doing their job, you know? Um, it really doesn't happen that much anymore with the pastors that we work with because they're, like Dave was saying, they're starting to see there's things I feel comfortable doing within my scope. And then there's things where it's like, I really need somebody, somebody professional to start working with this couple or this individual. Um, and so, yeah, it's that kind of stuff that I think is making a difference because people are seeking treatment faster. There's less stigma too, cultural, like in our culture today, a lot of people are seeing the value of mental health. So I think that helps as well. But really early detection of somebody in distress and destigmatizing it, even pastors going into therapy themselves and being able to speak from life experience and saying, I've struggled with this too, and you shouldn't feel shame in this, and just go and, talk to this person. I think that's all really, really helped to prevent those stage 4 things. Because, man, in 2015, when I was seeing all those folks, it was like depression, marital problems, problems with kids, substance abuse, sometimes domestic violence, like that would all converge, in one session. And that's where I'd be like, oh, geez, like it would have really helped if somebody intervened sooner in this family. Cause as you know, it trickles down. If you're not doing well as an individual, it's going to affect your marriage and it's going to affect your family. So that's a stage 4 diagnosis to me. But when people are getting referred to early, we don't see that as much. So,
Yeah. I would add to that size matters, and the larger your church becomes, the more critical smaller groups and the culture set for that will serve you well as an early detection system. In that, if a person is truly known and is not just a pixel in a huge audience, then there will be some real human being who has a continuity in their experience of you and will be able to say, I think something is going on with you. We'll poke and prod and ask the hard questions. Without that, if you're just an audience member, and if you're at a scale where they haven't addressed the granularity of human life and community, I think too many people slip through the cracks, and they have to get to a massive crisis point before they wave the flag for help. And so I do think that having community structures in place and a culture that normalizes asking deep and hard questions of one another, or paying attention to one another, beyond talking about the latest iPhone or something. I think that matters a great deal in saying, I'm seeing something and I want to just name it.
Thank you. We have one last question, and it's a wonderful encouragement from Lawrence. What you are doing is beautiful. On my end, I feel like the training for the pastoral counseling part is missing a lot in our geographical area. So I'm not sure where you are, Lawrence, but I'm guessing you're outside of Chicago. Any suggestion to better equip pastors? First, I'm going to invite Eugene Lee, who's in the New York area, to weigh in because he DM'd me to weigh in. So go ahead, Eugene, add your comments, and then I'll invite Dave and Irene to speak.
Yeah, hi, how are you? Name is Eugene. I think I'm first time in this kind of setting. Just quick background is I was a pastor for 25 plus years in Southern California, involved with, three of the, the more larger churches there as either leading or associate. I've been a clinical counselor for the last 5 years. The last church that I served at was more of a European American church, more white. Sunday attendance before pandemic was about 2,500, and I served there as a small group pastor there. They actually have something called, we're talking about stage 4, how do we get before stage 4? They actually have something called Mental Health Monday. And they have small groups every Monday that deal with mental health, everything from divorce care to celebrate recovery to grief counseling to anger management to children, parents of LGBTQ kids. So they would have that. The lead pastor would openly share on the pulpit, and I think this is more because before, I was like associate pastor at Yongnak EM before they kind of branched out, and other churches like that. So this is totally unheard of in a more of a Korean American church. But the lead pastor would openly share that he's part of sex addiction anonymous. He would openly share that he's taking antidepressant. His wife takes anti-anxiety, medication.
Yep.
Half of our staff of 50 plus, okay, about a third of them were on medication, okay. So we were very open about that.
Right.
So therefore, people we had probably about 36 counselors at church, and we regularly referred our members to the counselors. Okay, just openly, just saying, "Oh yeah, if you're going through this, this is a list of people in our congregation." So there was this sense of openness that shocked me initially when I got on staff and the senior pastor said, "I'm a sex addict. Okay, I'm involved with this." Wife comes up, shares testimony about antidepressant. I was like, "Oh man, we can't get it. We'll be kicked out, right? There's something wrong with you." But I was just kind of saying, I don't think we're gonna get to that point, okay? But just what the leadership just kind of modeled, just permeated everything through the congregation,
That's right.
and it just kind of resonated with that. Okay, so just kind of want to say how big of a role the leadership plays, just letting that out. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thanks, Eugene.
Thank you, Eugene. Dave, would you weigh in, and Irene, and then we'll close out?
That's super helpful, and I think we have to work hard at overcoming this narrative that will be never a possibility in the Asian American context. I think it's becoming normalized in a lot of churches, and it's certainly normalized in our church. And there's no hiding the help we seek or the issues we're struggling with. I think there's a fine line between acknowledging and owning our mental health issues and celebrating them as if they're wonderful things to be open about, but say, this is a distress for me, but I'm not going to hide the fact that I'm wrestling through this in the presence of God and with real help. Uh, um, are certain cultures I've seen that go beyond being open about it to almost like wearing it as just another label, and I don't think that's helpful. But to say like these are things that God is walking us through, and we are not going to hide anything at this church that we're going through. And so, like we will regularly encourage our pastors to be open about that. And I think that is important. You're absolutely right, Eugene, in that the leadership sets the culture and sets the unspoken cues about what's allowed and what's not allowed, what is hidden and what is out in the open. And the more revealing we can be, the more transparent we can be, we're going to encourage others to feel less alone in their own struggle, and to feel that is normalized.
Yeah, Pastor Dave alluded to a network of churches that he is part of and started in our area that are really open to issues of mental health. They get together regularly and talk about these issues. And I have noticed a difference just having the privilege of having to go in and talk a little bit about mental health, that there is a difference in going to a church that has been kind of like steeped in it, and like the topic has been normalized from the top down. In terms, even the leadership, just there's a tone that's different, and the questions people are asking and their ability to share is really different. So I think even with Asian culture, it's like very hierarchical, and people are more
Hmm.
influenced by what they see versus like maybe what they're being taught. Being taught it is important too, but like seeing people's lives change and seeing pastors really take that seriously in their own lives has made all the difference. So I really agree.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Irene, for joining us on Catalyst Wellness Alliance's AAPI Pastors Gathering. We do this every month as a part of equipping pastors about mental health and wellness. And there's a number of other organizations and institutions that are working on this issue as well. We're looking to build that national network of relationships to really address this together so we can collaborate and partner, because it's more than any one of us can do alone. Pastor Jin Lee in Atlanta, Georgia, is the founder of Catalyst Coalition and Catalyst Wellness Alliance. He's going to give us a closing word, and then we'll have about 20 minutes to hang out if you have time to hang out, and we'll have some casual off-the-record conversation. Pastor Jin, close us out.
Yeah, DJ, thank you so much. Irene, David, this is one of my, I probably say this all the time, but this was so good in many ways because it's a template of what Alana could do. And so thank you so much for kind of being a pioneer and then be able to share it. I've been following and watching through TJ's influence about the work, and Irene, we met several times on it, but to hear from both sides, the pastor and the clinician, that really energized me to start something like PACT here. And so, like EJ said, we want to support pastors and create a safe place to talk about mental health. And we want the flourishing of our pastors and our congregation, because we know that pastors are the front line of the amazing work of the community. So we want our pastors to flourish. And as you know, mental health is such a misnomer, like a lot of gray area. And so we want to have a safe place. And so DJ's work is creating this monthly and part of that initiative. And so thank you for this. Some ways that you guys can get involved in creating this space and growing it is just share your other pastors. I think word of mouth that we have this monthly gathering of safe place for pastors will be a very important thing. Another thing that you can participate is this past month in May, we did a series on Asian parenting seminars, and we just hit an area that's a potential reach out potential and allowing guidance on mental health for Asian parents. Because if the parents do well, as you know, the kids will hopefully do well. And there is an epidemic in the area of our teens in mental health. So as we have one next week, and we thought we're just going to be done with May, but the call from our parents want more resource. And so we're planning to have another one next week and create that monthly rhythm of convening Asian parents on the topic of mental health. So that's another way to support it and sharing that resource to your congregation. But once again, thank you so much, Irene and David, and thank you, DJ, always to facilitate this. Thank you, everyone.